about 4:32. People will just pop in when they're ready. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Jamie Pasquinelli, District Manager for ULI Pittsburgh. Welcome to our first virtual dinner. I'm so excited to see everybody here wanting to support our restaurants in Pittsburgh and 412 Food Rescue. As always, thank you to our sponsors for making programming like this possible. We couldn't do it without you. I hope everybody got to use their DoorDash gift card to get something super delicious to munch on while we're doing this program. As a self-proclaimed foodie like myself, and I'm one to always have food envy, I would love to hear where you ordered from and what you got. And if you have a second to put the fork down or between bites to slap it in the chat, we would love to hear what you're eating. Also, I hope you saw the signature cocktail that went out with an email, the Bourbon Smash. If anybody did make it, I would love to hear what you thought of it. So just a few housekeeping tips. Please make sure your mics are muted throughout the program to prevent any distractions. We'll also be engaging in a Q&A after the presentation. So just please insert your questions into the chat at any point. We'll get to them. After the program, we will be doing our happy half hour with our young leaders, and we'll be put in breakout rooms for a half-hour session. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our speakers for this afternoon. Terri Sokoloff, President of Specialty Bar and Restaurant Brokers and Specialty Real Estate Ltd. Sidney Sokoloff, Vice President, Specialty Group. Edie Hartman, Brokerage Coordinator, Specialty Real Estate Ltd. And Melissa Bova, Vice President of Government Affairs for Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association. So Terri, I will hand it on over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Jamie. So everybody, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate this opportunity to have a conversation regarding the restaurant industry. We wanted to thank ULI for presenting this program. To give you a little bit background, my husband, Ned, and I, we founded Specialty Group in '86. So the platform was to be a one-stop shop to have all these services under one roof. And Ned's father, it was called Big Bill. He owned over 20 shot and beer bars in Philadelphia. So when Ned's father got sick, Ned was recruited by a liquor attorney in Pittsburgh and learned about liquor licensing, selling licenses, lending, and selling bars and restaurants. So Ned had a vision in '86, and I was 22 years old, so I had no clue. So I went along with it, and here I am today to have all the services under one roof. We'll have today Sidney Sokoloff, who's Vice President speaking, and Edie Hartman, who's Brokerage Operations Director, and Melissa Bova, we're very pleased to have. She's Vice President of Government Affairs for the PRLA. That is the Pennsylvania Restaurant Lodging Association. And we've been a member since the very beginning of our company. Ned served on the board of directors, and Sidney has, and Ned's had the past Associate Member of the Year. So to get back into the meat here, I wanted to just talk about the impact the restaurant industry has had. So in 2020, and it's hard for me to even get a grasp, restaurant sales were $899 billion. Eating place restaurants were about $617 billion out of this number, and bars and taverns were $188 billion. So when the pandemic hit, the sales fell about $240 billion. So the economic impact of restaurants, and it's hard to imagine, but it's $2.5 trillion. And our industry employs about 15.6 million people. So that's 1 out of 10 working Americans. So after, COVID, we lost about 2.5 million folks, because of COVID. So right now with restaurants, you'll see, and there's a lot of independents. So 9 out of 10 restaurants have fewer than 50 employees. And you see a lot of independents in Pittsburgh. And then 7 to 10, restaurants are single unit operations. And one fact that I really like is restaurants employ more minorities and women managers than any industry. And we're also the top employer of teenagers in the economy. 1 out of 3 employed teens works in our industry. So Edie's going to talk about the consumer behavior of bar and restaurant dining folks. Take it away, Edie.
Thanks, Terry. So one of the things that we discovered in our research about this is that consumer preference for convenience in particular is growing exponentially. It was doing that prior to COVID, and then the pandemic has basically just pushed that momentum even further. A National Restaurant Association survey in 2019 found that 60% of those surveyed were more likely to pick up takeout for dinner on their way home than they had been even 2 years prior to that. And more than half of those surveys said that if they had the option, they would have liked to have added alcoholic beverages to their orders. So that's something definitely to be considered. And then, other things that have really come to surface over the last couple of years in particular are a connection to community. So many of those who were surveyed said that they were, actually 76% of those surveyed said that they would be more inclined to patronize a restaurant that was using locally sourced foods or was offering things that were locally sourced. And altruism, continuing there with more than half of those responding saying that if, a restaurant was tied to charitable organizations or supported charitable activities, that they would be even more inclined to continue patronizing those establishments. So Cohen & Company, which is a multinational investment and financial services firm, actually predicted that the US delivery market would skyrocket from 43 billion in 2020 to over 76 billion by 2022. So that's a pretty astronomical number when you think about it. And not surprisingly, millennials and Gen Zers are the demographic that is probably most likely to value that level of convenience. And they also yield a pretty substantial amount of spending power. So we're looking at about 84 million people in the United States between the ages of 19 and 37. And that group collectively has a spending power of $2.5 trillion. So obviously the market is shifting to accommodate the preference for convenience. And we're going to get into that a little bit more and how restaurants today can take advantage of that change later in our program. So I'm going to shift over to Melissa now so she can touch base a little bit on some of the things that are going on legislatively.
Absolutely. Thank you, Edie. Thank you all for having me today. Going to provide a little bit of background just for your edification. I just got very big on my screen. The PRLA represents the entirety across the state, and that's Macy in the background. She has run of the house. PRLA represents the entirety of the restaurant, hotel, and tourism industry in Pennsylvania. So we represent all of your restaurants, all of your hotels, all of your attractions that you have, your amusement parks, your golf clubs. We also represent your destination marketing organization. So Visit Pittsburgh is a member of PRLA. So we represent the entirety of hospitality and tourism. Of course, 2020 is a year that I continue to say I never want to go through again, but I'm starting to say that a little bit about 2021. So hopefully when we hit the last part of 2021, things are going to get a little bit better. But to let you know what we're looking at legislatively, I am government affairs. So biased, I think that via government, by banging my head against the wall and screaming at them enough, we're going to get through this, and we're making progress. We have a few items that PRLA is focusing on right now. The biggest thing that we're looking at and working on is the federal government. And then I'm going to drill down a little bit into what's happening at the state level, because that's really where Specialty Group has been a great partner of PRLA in achieving some of those legislative priorities. There is not enough money to get this industry through COVID, but guess what? This industry will get through COVID. We have overcome worse, we will overcome, and it is expected that we will come back stronger than before. We anticipate already for when it comes to travel for our hotel communities, 56% of people are already planning to travel before the end of this year. Those are the same numbers we had in 2019 before COVID hit. So the population, now that vaccines are out, are already planning to go out and travel again and stay in our hotels and eat in our restaurants. And that is only going to increase. So leisure travel is going to come back better than ever. Not by the end of this year, but shortly thereafter. And then business travel, which of course are those consistent business travelers that you get day after day, will be back a little bit later, but will start coming back by the end of this year. So PRLA really pivoted in terms of how do we get the industry through this crisis. At the federal level, as you all know, we passed the P3 back in March, which was a lifesaver when we had the first rounds of shutdowns. Those funds went a long way, but they only lasted so long. After that, we were able to pass legislation again in December that creates that employee retention tax credit, gives restaurants 3.5 times their payroll, restaurants and hotels 3.5 times their payroll to kind of get their businesses back on track. And now we're working on another federal package that will infuse billions of dollars back into the industry because the federal government recognizes the importance of this industry. As Terri said, we are 1 in 10 of employers right now. 10% of the population was employed in our industry and will be again. We're the first job for many people. We have more minority and women-owned businesses than any other industry. And the fact that the federal government is infusing cash means that they recognize the ability for this industry to come back and recover via our restaurants and our hotels specifically. State level, which is where I spend most of my time with all 253 members of our great state legislature. Funds are also a big part of that too. But another item, as I said, that Specialty Group has been a great partner in are liquor legislation issues and how we can ease the experience that our licensees are having as it pertains to their liquor licenses. So allowing those mixed drinks, those margaritas you're able to get at your restaurant to go, making those permanent, allowing those items to be delivered to your customers. I'm sure it's going to be talked about. To go is going to be a part of this industry forever. And the industry needs to adapt to accommodate to all of that. Increasing the licensee discount so restaurants can get their product at a better price. Streamlining the transition of liquor licenses. Whether we like it or not, as people are getting out of this industry, we need to make sure that those that want to get into it are able to access those licenses and invest back in the industry. So those are all types of things that we're focusing on at the state level. In addition to that, we have things like liability protection, sales tax reform, all types of things. But PRLA's focus really through all of this is recognizing that this industry is going to come back. It's going to come back stronger than it was before. And what tools do we need to get us there faster so we can continue to add to that food scene that is starting to make Pittsburgh and Allegheny County such a destination for travelers. So that is generally what we're working on. But of course, as we work through all of this, I'm happy to answer any questions. And also whoever got the Thai and crab rangoon, if you could send that out to Harrisburg, that would be greatly appreciated. But with that, happy to answer any questions as we move forward the rest of the presentation. Thank you. And I think I'm turning it back to Terri.
Terri, you're muted.
Okay, so sorry about that. So we wanted to talk about where the current landscape is, what activity do we see? So I'm going to have Sidney talk about the liquor licenses, sales, and value.
Thanks, Terri. So a lot of questions I received in the past year were, can I get a liquor license below market value? And I understand the question because you hear about bars and restaurants closing, unfortunately, very frequently. Surprisingly, liquor license sales have probably been at their highest. The value has stayed pretty consistent for restaurant liquor licenses, which are licenses that you see in your everyday grocery stores, bars, restaurants, you name it, gas stations. So right now, an Allegheny County liquor license outside the city of Pittsburgh is selling for about $75,000, $80,000. If you have a liquor license in the city, you're looking about $85,000, $90,000. That was the value right before COVID, and that is the value now. The demand is high and the value has sustained. We're also, thanks to the PRLA and efforts on the government side, allowing hotel licenses to convert their licenses to restaurant liquor licenses. So not only are we seeing licenses sell at a pretty quick rate, but also new licenses are entering the market. So this really is the time where people are preparing for that next generation of restaurant owners or expansion. But I'd say COVID really hasn't impacted our market at all. But on liquor license end, that's where we see those values. In terms of wholesale, beer distributors haven't really been impacted by COVID at all. If not, they've benefited from all of the closures. So for example, distributor licenses were selling for about $115,000 before COVID. And right now they're going almost to $200,000. So the wholesale market's booming on top of restaurant liquor licenses. But into that, we can talk about bar and restaurant sales as a whole. So Terri, I will push this back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sid. So, the $1 million question that, came up with valuations were, well, what's my business going to be worth? What happens next? So a lot of people we've worked with, and it's been common to throw out the 220 sales because it's a pandemic. We can't go on. There are people who believe that they're going to buy it for the 220 sales, and maybe some folks can, but a lot of times with lending and valuations, we've been able to compare what did someone do prior to the pandemic and where they are now. And I'll talk a little bit further, about that. But I wanted to touch on leases, and I'll get back to lending. So in the beginning of the year, we kept hearing force majeure, force majeure. And if you would have asked me about force majeure a few years ago, I thought it would have been a dish on the Twisted Frenchman's menu. So I'm not going to talk about that because we have a lot of great legal minds on this. And that's a legal question. I know a lot of lawyers are following different cases. But what I did want to talk about is the mechanics of restaurant leases and what needs to be, I'll call it the new now. Because before the pandemic, we saw a lot of leases with 5-year options. And then we've seen a lot of leases with a 10-year, straight lease. So right now, people want to see a shorter term lease. We've had a couple deals where there's maybe only 3 years left on the lease. And before, that would be a suicide, and a buyer would be very concerned. Now it's like, oh my God, this is the best thing. That's all I want. I want to see if this is going to work. So with a buyer or a tenant wanting to see a shorter term lease, it does come with, the other end of the stick is, well, they're going to want to build out. So how can you as a landlord, as an owner, give that same healthy build out to someone who wants to be there for 3 years? And how does that work for your projections with the lenders? So there has to be give and take. So what we did see with landlords, and I called it RAD solutions, you saw at the beginning reductions, abatement, and rent deferral. And I think rent deferral, I don't think that's realistic. A lot of the people we dealt with said, I don't need a loan from my landlord. I don't need a loan. And you can't expect someone to pay for the future of what they couldn't pay for in the past. And I understand people have carrying costs on buildings and so forth. And I do think tenants should be paying, an appropriate share of what they can pay. Now, the other thing was in the beginning of the pandemic, I found, and I'm sure lots of you have seen it, like a landlord questionnaire that went through a checklist of, did your tenant receive any federal funding, government assistance, any type of assistance before you decided if you could help them with the rent. And, there are also tenants who their sales skyrocketed with this. So it's always where no one wants to be taken advantage of. So I think everything is, a case by case, scenario on that. So, and then you see, I'll call it the percentage rent panacea. I think this is a temporary Band-Aid. Maybe it's a fair thing to do for people right now, but I think that's going to need to change. So on the lender standpoint, and what we did see is, like, right now we have to be focused on our sales of which lenders have the appetite to get involved with a restaurant transaction. Who's interested in doing that? And some banks, they're not interested. One of the things, and it makes a challenge because we just had a deal that closed, was we were comparing the sales from one end of 2019 to where they were now. But again, like what Melissa said, is to get that cocktail to go, it's really hard if you have someone who has a sports bar, they sell a ton, literally a ton of wings. Somebody comes in, they're drinking a few beers. Right now, if somebody goes in to get those wings, they're not taking the beer out. So you can't possibly compare their sales now, that percentage, to where they were. It is skewed. So hopefully with the PLCB that they're addressing, and Sidney and Melissa can both talk about that, how, you know, we can move forward with some productive, I'll call it, solutions. So I'll go back to the SBA, which I thought it was, wow. The 7A and 504 programs that were fully dispersed prior to September 27 and not under an EIDL. The SBA was covering 6 months of the principal, interest, and any associated fees that they owed for the 7A and the 504 microloans, excluding the PPP. So the Economic Aid Act has authorized debt relief payments beyond 6 months. So everything changes, I'll say, by the minute with the SBA, and there's a lot more details, but I just wanted to throw it out there that, you know, some restaurant folks and somebody we just did a deal with prior to September, I was relieved that they did have with the SBA relief, and we thought that was very helpful. So Sidney, I'm going to go back to, and I'm hoping I'm on the right agenda here for Sidney. If I'm wrong, please correct me, to talk about liquor licenses.
So in terms of the market, and thank you, Terry, we talk about and we hear a lot about closures, but now it's more about what's going to come, what's next, how are we going to recover? So in terms of liquor licenses, there is a high demand. There is a limited quantity. The state has made it so there's only one license for every 3,000 people per county. Now, a few years ago, maybe about, well, not a few, but about 30 years ago, there were people able to create new licenses, which has increased our quantity per county. That being said, buying a license isn't as simple as it sounds. You have to buy a license, you have to transfer it. Then you have to make sure the license you're buying is in a clean and transferable state. Right now, in the pandemic, people who would be considered trying to dump their license will actually slow a transaction down, because typically if it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. So one of the things in the pandemic, taking into consideration the PPP loans, there are liens against these liquor licenses. So it adds an extra hurdle to clean a license to sell it. But fortunately, if the right steps are done, you can buy a license that is available for market value. So there is a large availability, but finding the right license really is the biggest challenge now. In terms of value, fortunately, COVID really hasn't caused much of a problem on the value of the license. If not, I can only see them going up since the demand is high and the supply is becoming lower and lower. Right now, it's actually interesting to see how many new licensees are coming up versus licensees trying to get their second or third license. I would say it's pretty balanced in terms of potential buyer market. The nice thing also, which Melissa can kind of segue with, she brought up earlier, is delivery. We, with liquor licenses, are kind of like cell phone plans. The state allows you to sell alcohol, but if you'd like to add features on, you must pay for it. So in terms of permits that will help during COVID, we have a wine expanded permit, which allows licensees to sell about 3 liters of wine per transaction. And that costs our licensees $2,000 up front and 2% renewal fee every year. But it will allow them to sell wine to go on top of mixed drinks to go, on top of beer to go. There also is a transporter for hire license, which Melissa, I'm sure we can talk about our stories from years ago, but in 2016, the PLCB changed the law allowing for beer to be delivered by a licensee up to 192 fluid ounces. Fortunately, there was a loophole that allowed us to combine that license with the wine expanded permit, which I then reached out to Melissa because they changed their stance once we put a press release out. So we're still fighting the good fight to try to have wine delivered. And Melissa, is there anything you'd like to add about wine delivery and liquor delivery?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as Sidney said, and I have great friends at the LCB, so they can appreciate that when I roll my eyes a little bit, I'm rolling my eyes with love and affection. So really with the LCB is licensees, if you order a pizza, you can get up to 2 6-packs to go with that pizza, that 192 ounces, or wings, whatever it is. Then because of just the way they wrote the law, literally just the way they wrote the law, they said that when somebody purchases the wine, you have to make sure that they look over the age of 35. And the only way you can do that, well, now we have Zoom, so maybe there is a wiggle room there. The only way you can do that is if they're there purchasing it in person. Well, then that kind of defeats the purpose of ordering it via the phone or the internet and having it delivered and having them check the ID when they deliver it. It's the stupidest little thing in a bill, but it has stopped restaurants from being able to deliver wine. And then to that end, as we said, for right now, we can do cocktails to go. I can go and get my espresso martinis because I do not have an espresso maker, and bring that home with me and have that espresso martini at home, but you aren't allowed to deliver it. And so really what we're looking at is if we can deliver beer safely, we should be able to deliver the rest of the products. And this goes into, we could have a whole nother conversation about this, of the Uber Eats of the world and the Grubhubs. But really what we're talking about is your local restaurant that has a vehicle, they can deliver those products to you. So it's really what we're trying to do is take things that are logical and apply them to restaurants and also to all of you, so you can have that restaurant experience in the comfort of your home if that's what you're choosing to do, which provides even more financial relief to the restaurant industry. So we're working through all of that. That includes, of course, the discussion of ready to drinks, those canned cocktails. I have not tried them. But all of that is kind of part of the conversations we're having right now. As we said, as Sidney said, licenses are going in Allegheny County upwards of $80,000. We have licenses in the southeast part of the state that go for $300,000-$400,000. This is a big investment, but there is a return on investment, and we are focused on maximizing that ROI that you get from investing in that license. Even if you're a hotel and you're getting a hotel license, you still need to build a hotel. You still have that really big investment that you need to make. So that's why, as Sidney said, things like delivery, making cocktails to go permanent, items that are exciting to you as a consumer also help the restaurant and hospitality industry as well.
Especially in Pittsburgh, with our weather here, you can't eat outside right now. So having items delivered to your house, the convenience is paramount. I mean, to help grow revenue, help keep businesses open. I mean, and talking about license values, we're in Allegheny County, but if you drive 20 minutes up to Butler County, the licenses are selling for about $400,000. So a short drive can cost you a lot more money. But thank you, Melissa. I appreciate the add-in. And I'm going to actually segue the next portion to Edie. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Sidney. So I think probably before you all jumped into the call today, you got an email from Jamie that had a little flyer that looks like this, if you got a chance to open it up. Kind of the buzzword right now is pivot, and that extends far beyond the restaurant and bar industry. Obviously, all businesses, particularly smaller businesses, are looking for ways to pivot their business model and their delivery platforms in order to better meet the demands of their clients and to stay in business, quite honestly. So that kind of sparked some creativity here in our office to kind of come up with an anagram or an acronym with the word pivot to help restaurants in particular, but this could be extended, like I said, to any small business, to some 5 steps essentially that you could look to broaden your platform and stay alive. And so not only stay alive, but also to thrive as we go into the second half of 21 and things do start to come back. So P is for protecting your people. We've said, you've heard it time and time again, it's the place, or it's not the place, it's the people that makes, an establishment great. So advocating for your employees is more important than ever. Making sure that all of the safety protocol that you've put into place for your clients or your guests also is extended to your employees, making sure that if any of them are eligible to go and get the vaccine, that you're supporting them and making sure that that happens as well. Obviously we've discussed prior on the call, PPP and government funding. In addition to the PPP loans, there's also local and county, grant programs and things like that you can tack on. We've had clients successfully do that and, survive 2020 pretty well. So it's definitely worth looking into anything that can be done to keep people employed. Transparency obviously is key when communicating with employees, letting them know, if you're going to make changes to the policies, making sure they understand the policies regarding, paid time off, any kind of sick time or vacation that you're offering, anything that you may be changing, just so that they can always be prepared. And then, ensuring that they have access not just to financial resources if you have had to, do layoffs or cuts, but also, making sure that you're checking in with them from a mental health standpoint and physical well-being. As I think all can acknowledge, 2020 was pretty hard on everybody from a mental health perspective. And hopefully we are beginning to see the light, but it's important to, do those well checks with everybody. I is for innovate. So this is a great opportunity to, as I like to say, put on your creative toque blanche, which is your white chef hat, and figure out some new ways to do your business. Maybe test some different or alternate revenue streams and reach customers in different ways than you have in the past. Many small business owners are not particularly tech savvy or not really on social media. This is a great time. It costs absolutely nothing to start up social media channels and just do some authentic grassroots type posts and really connect with customers that are already on those platforms. Tweak the menu to create, grab and go items or create some meal kits, maybe host some online cooking shows, partner with local purveyors and do something really customized that you can really promote on a local scale. What else? Consider hosting a ghost kitchen. We've actually talked with a couple of clients who have partnered with NextBite, which is a third-party marketer and collaborator. They work with Wiz Khalifa's concept Hotbox, if you're familiar, if you've seen that in the media. They're looking for additional operators throughout the region. Each partner with them has a designated area, so they're looking to expand that, and they work with multiple different ghost kitchen concepts, so not just Hotbox. So there's a great opportunity to designate a portion of the kitchen to creating those. And the nice thing is the third party takes care of all of the marketing. So it's essentially just purchasing the foods and preparing them and having them ready to go for a delivery driver. Great way to boost revenue, in difficult times. So valuing your customer is what the V stands for. Communication is key to any successful relationship, which we know. So reaching out to customers and making sure that they understand that you're eager to continue serving them as safely and efficiently as possible. Look at ways to maximize your legal capacity for indoor dining and take opportunity to convert maybe some exterior spaces to additional outdoor dining. Keeping as close to regular hours as possible. Even though we're all stuck inside, I think we've all come to appreciate that convenience that I talked about earlier. And you have an expectation that when you want to call and get something ordered on the weekends at like 10 o'clock at night, you're kind of expecting that place that you always order from that has been open till 2 a.m. to be open. So I think it really bodes well for building loyalty and keeping that client base that you currently have, as well as expanding and getting some new ones to stick to your regular hours as much as possible. And then obviously demonstrating that you are, complying with all mandates regarding safety and cleanliness, and increasing, again, your social media connections and your websites, doing more frequent updates than maybe you did prior to COVID, just letting people know what's going on and what you have to offer that might be different. So staying in touch. And then the O, I touched on a little bit, was optimizing off-premises dining. So we talked about how the convenience market is expected to just explode. And that's where Pivot really comes into play, is many of the operators who are seeing success now or have continued to build on their business over the course of the pandemic shutdowns and restrictions have done so because they've been able to pivot from just offering in-person dining to really being able to offer the same kind of service and selection to their customers on a to-go basis or a delivery basis. So, it's absolutely the time to examine the menu, figure out which dishes make the most sense to offer on a takeout or delivery model. Clearly not everything is the best when delivered as it is when you eat in person. So figuring out what's going to be your secret sauce for that. Then offering, the contactless delivery, either, hiring some delivery drivers or working with a third-party provider like a Grubhub or a DoorDash or an Uber Eats. And then, having that curbside pickup available so people can just grab and go on their way home for dinner. And always making sure that you're incorporating training with your staff, because when you're making these changes and things, you want to be sure that they feel comfortable and can easily pivot their way into doing something a little bit differently than they have in the past. So making sure that, you know, you're taking care of your people with that. And then T is touch up your technology. If you've been thinking about, you know, the website looks a little stale, maybe it's time. I mean, maybe it's time to make an investment and upgrade that website, you know, incorporate an ability to, you know, take online orders. If you haven't done that before, work with a designer to build an app so that you can do mobile ordering and delivery, even all the way to upgrading your POS system. Maybe it's not exactly the best for, you know, receiving incoming online orders, or it's not easy for a server to pivot back and forth and be able to do both things like what they need to do right now. So all of those things kind of play into being able to pivot successfully. And we think, you know, even though we've been dealt a colossal blow by the pandemic, there is opportunity for savvy restaurateurs to take advantage of that and really serve their customers in ways that they have never done before. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Terri.
Okay, thanks, Edie. And again, support your local restaurants. So, you know, what we're seeing, and in conclusion, I see some questions coming through, so we'd be happy to address those. And again, there's so much information and so much we can talk about that, you know, we're hoping this can be part of the first conversation. One of the things that Sidney did mention, and with the PPP, so what we're seeing in bar and restaurant sales, and to be cognizant of, is that on the deal, if there's a PPP, and let's say someone has a PPP for $100,000, the lenders are now requiring, and it has not been forgiven, that $100,000 is escrow. We just had a transaction where the seller did not have the additional money to escrow. And I thought, oh boy, are we going to have to lend them the money prior to the closing? The lender would not allow that amount to come out of the proceeds on the closing settlement statement. So we are advising anyone we're dealing with on a resale of a business that, you know, how much is your PPP? This might have to happen. So I do see this as a potential challenge. So I wanted to let everybody know. So, you know, where we're seeing things is there's a new generation of buyer, and I think that's exciting. You know, the landlords and lenders, I mean, your expectations need to be realistic, especially if we have a shutdown somewhere. And I've always said that our industry is recession proof. And then I started saying, uh-oh, is it pandemic proof? And I'm here to tell you, yes, it is. Not everybody's pandemic proof, but I really believe that the bars and the restaurants, the golf courses, and like Melissa said, who the PRLA represents, yes, I do believe that there is life, you know, after we get through some of the, you know, the challenges. And as you see, and some of the closings might be skewed that you see, because we know from a long time of experience that sometimes these exit strategies, and you hear it's a pandemic, it's a pandemic, it's a pandemic, that's really not accurate, because some folks, their leases are up. They're not going to renew. There isn't a succession plan. Maybe they're a little older and they just want to be done. And we've had folks with, you know, it's just, yeah, it's very upsetting to me. We just lost one of our clients, passed away of COVID, but he had leukemia. And we have some folks in some stage 4 situations that they need to sell. So the pandemic isn't a starring role in every decision, you know, for folks, that why they're closing down. And there's people who had abrupt closures before the pandemic. We were like, wow, they only waited a month or two. They could have, you know, pulled off the pandemic. So I'd like to thank everybody for listening in, and we're all happy to address any questions. And the other thing is, I apologize because our person that we had that we wanted to talk about with the case study ran into some challenges with our great city of Pittsburgh, the permitting office. So if anybody knows anybody down there that can get them to facilitate folks wanting to open up new businesses, that would be helpful. So we can have somebody, we can have her, excuse me, for the next, man, I should be drinking.
Fortunately, we're going to have her for the next sessions. We're excited to present to you a case study so you can migrate through different parts of the content over the series of these webinars.
Thanks. And we have the AED device in case I go down. Okay.
I know where it is. Don't worry.
Thank you. All right. We're open for questions.
Yeah, you have a few questions here. This one is, have you witnessed any creative use of vacant retail restaurant spaces during COVID?
This is real. Edie, what are they doing? The consignment shop of furniture?
Yes, that is true.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know where Edie went.
Edie,
yeah, but so there was the
Edie,
consignment shop. Yes,
guys, sorry about that. I didn't want to breathe on Terry's segment. We are seeing that, not in, I would say not in extensive use around the area, but we definitely have seen some retail spaces be converted for a variety of different things, namely like thrift shops and short-term pop-up type things around the holidays. So that, that's kind of been a trend that's been around for a little bit. It'll be interesting to see, how that continues. Restaurant spaces are a little bit difficult to convert if there's existing equipment and furniture and fixtures in there. So that makes it a little bit of a challenge, but we'll see. People are doing things differently. So there's going to be, I think a difference in how we see future build outs and renovations. I think when we start to approach a lot of lease expirations with existing operators, there's going to be requests probably for some new tenant improvement allowance to renovate and do more of a takeout or to-go type format. Or many of the prospects we're working with now are looking for spaces where they can do assembly for the third-party deliveries. They don't have that ability in their existing kitchens. So I think some of those challenges are going to be addressed, with some of those vacant spaces, maybe being converted or, expanded into.
And we also see, just to piggyback a little bit in a different direction with leases with landlords. We just had a situation, a client came in last week and the landlord was insisting that they keep the same operating hours. Mm-hmm. So, and it's a very well-known restaurant, maybe in Shadyside, but I thought that was completely, it's just ridiculous. So again, people have to everybody needs to adjust.
Awesome. A couple more questions. The next one is, who will make up the next wave of restaurateurs?
Hey, Sid, do you want to take that?
Yeah. So in terms of new operators, you're seeing a lot of the millennials that we used to criticize come to their leadership roles and assume, newer businesses, maybe smaller, fast-paced, quick, casual restaurants popping up. Since delivery is the current market, the primary, you're seeing these younger people coming in, trying to find smaller spaces, shorter leases, partnering up with other types of restaurants, breweries, wineries, and also food trucks. Food trucks are very popular now. It's a good way to bring, a fresh concept or a startup concept into the market and gradually produce that brand, that product. But it's kind of like new money is coming in, new businesses, new ideas. People who've been waiting by the wayside are ready to start, their time. It's coming.
And we have people coming in from other cities that want to get out of their city and maybe they don't have childcare or they're not happy how their state has handled our industry through the pandemic. So we're seeing, we'll call it the out of town, buyer coming in.
I think another place that we're going to see a lot of migration from is there are a lot of incubator kitchens and startup areas that have kind of surfaced over the last couple of years within Pittsburgh. A couple of new ones have actually opened within the last 12, 18 months. So there are concepts that are being developed within those spaces. The cost to subscribe or become a member of those spaces is pretty hefty if you have a larger platform of menu items. So if you're doing more prep work and you're needing more hours, it ends up becoming comparable to, a common lease. So I think we're going to see many of those operators starting to see opportunity within the market to, have something that they can call their own and really expand their, their platform and how they're, delivering what they're doing. And so I would expect to see quite a few new operators. They're not going to be totally new. You'll have heard of them, but they have not had a freestanding space before. So I think we're going to see a lot of that over the next couple of years.
Okay, I think I missed a couple here. How fast are third-party delivery services growing? Will this become the new normal for food delivery?
Absolutely. You have Uber Eats, you have Grubhub, you have Postmates, you have DoorDash. There's probably other ones, but I know those are the 4 primary ones. They're dominating our market. And Melissa, maybe you can partner with me on this question, because alcohol deliveries can also play a role here.
Yeah, if anybody has benefited from COVID, it has been the third-party delivery companies. That is how we're getting our food. You can go online and just order it, and it's at your door, 30, 45 minutes later. There are some items that we feel need to be addressed as it pertains to them, and that's something we're working with at the state level. We passed legislation in Philadelphia. These companies are great. But in some ways they don't have an agreement with the restaurant. So you might see a menu and order from it. It might not be the actual menu for the restaurant. You might order something that isn't on their menu. The pricing might be wrong. And then when all of that changes, when you receive your order, you're blaming the restaurant. And really, we need to work on a partnership and communication with these third-party delivery companies and the restaurant, making sure that there is a partnership there. And fees are a big issue, that while third-party delivery companies have been a help, they sometimes charge restaurants 30 to 40% on the food. And that's because they're trying to make money as well. And that's understandable. But when you have restaurants that are trying to figure out the new normal, we're really actively looking at the fact, as Sidney said, that this is the food delivery. This is the restaurant operation of the future. And how do we make sure that there is that common ground between these companies and the restaurants? And PRLA has great relationships and communications with companies like Grubhub, and Uber Eats, and we continue to have those conversations, and you're going to see more dialogue there, but they're definitely not going away. But we also have to figure out how they can thrive and not at the cost of a restaurant.
I think I saw a question in the chat about POS systems and delivery, so I'm just kind of going to integrate that here. But I think in terms of integration, with WordPress, different types of website models, Wix, integrations are popular, especially if you have the right POS system that integrates to a cloud base. Fortunately, those options are available, but in terms of the convenience, some restaurants who are struggling can't afford to pay those delivery people. And especially if you have that ability with a liquor license to transport, you have to make sure the vehicle meets certain qualifications. So right now, in additional expenses, it's probably not worth, especially with high turnover, having the proper vehicle, having the proper employee to do everything, making sure carding is correct. If you use a third party, you save a ton of convenience, you lose a little more money, but it also increases marketing, it increases the brand, exposure. How many people are using Grubhub, DoorDash, and Postmates? So POS integration, yes. Convenience right now, I think, is weighed heavier.
Awesome, thank you. Another question. A number of restaurants have closed in Market Square. What do you see that area looking like a year from now?
Oh, can I answer? Okay. Does anybody have any real estate interest in Market Square before I answer the question? Okay. I guess no one said that. Or yes. So anyway, I think Market Square is popular as it, I'll call it, was the rents were very expensive. And I think, right now, people want, I don't want to say bargains, but they want reasonable rent that they can afford. And when you get some owners that, somebody told us, oh, it's only like $20,000 a month. And by the way, you got to buy the license and I'm going to sell you the equipment, for this price. And I'm like, okay, no, we're not interested in dealing with that. And I think I'll parlay it to downtown because I saw a question, you know, people are going to come back to downtown. I mean, my observation is your coworkers might never wear a suit again unless they're going to court, but people are going to come back. We have interest in the opportunities we're working on where we have multiple people. They want to get in, they want to, and I think the key thing is, you know, with some of these older establishments, just revamping the style, and like what Edie had mentioned with the ghost kitchens and so forth. So town is still there, and it's going to come back, and people are going to have to operate a little bit differently. And you also have the residents downtown, and we have our great cultural district too downtown, and the sports and so forth. So yes, you know, it's a little sleepy now, but absolutely. And I guess I'll go back to Market Square. I mean, if the rent's too high, the rent's too high. Doesn't matter what part of the city or suburbs you're in.
Yeah, you're going to see, I would piggyback on that and say the financial institutions can afford to put banks. You know, we've seen that happen. A restaurant conversion into a bank branch just happened in the last, year or so. So I think that we're going to see a different selection of retailers within Market Square, maybe not quite as much, not as food heavy as we've been accustomed to. But I do think with regard to downtown, just to touch on that, I'm pretty bullish about it. And I think it is going to come back for sure. It's going to come back differently than what we knew prior to COVID, obviously. But I think that's actually going to create more opportunity for, operators in our industry, because I think landlords are looking at doing major amenities upgrades within their buildings. There's definitely going to be a food and beverage component to that. It is inevitable. So, as they're revising and creating more open areas and community-based collaborative areas within their buildings, there's going to be a need for food providers. And so I think there's going to be a different model than we've been accustomed to seeing. So those Market Square rents for, those first floor retail spaces, they're going to have to become more competitive, because there's going to be operators with an opportunity to go into a building and do, a very competitive lease agreement to be able to be a food provider or possibly exclusively within the building. So I think there's going to be creative ways that food and beverage operators can definitely move forward within this decade.
Great. I think we have time for one more. Has there been any talk or good models you know of restaurant menu collaborations, i.e. ability to order from several restaurants in one order to mix and match, drinks from one and meals from another?
I've seen, I think with the Amped Group, they condensed or consolidated all the restaurants into a food hall. So you can order from one menu from all 4 restaurants. Mm-hmm. But in terms of buying a drink from one place and buying food in delivery purposes, I don't believe that'd be permissible just because of liquor license. But if there was a collaboration of one owner with multiple concepts, then I think that's the only example I can think of that really hits on the head.
Yeah, sometimes we order at the office from 3 different suppliers because I don't want this and somebody else wants something else. And I think that's a great idea to streamline that.
Awesome. Go ahead. Sorry, Sidney.
Liz, I have a question for you. In terms of liquor licenses with restaurants, since there was a time where the government cut the seating requirements and focused more on takeout, do you think, or do you see the government creating a new type of license so more fast casual or just delivery only places can focus on alcohol sales? Or do you see them modifying restaurant liquor licenses so you'll see, I guess, in, let's say Market Square could have 3 different takeout types of, establishments?
Oh man. Okay. So, I mean, as you all know, because a license is a piece of property, anytime the legislature says, let's create a new license, let's create, a takeout only license, all of those who spent $80, $90, $100, $200, $300, $400,000 are saying, that's crazy. I invested all of this money. Why would you give it to somebody else? So I think we're going to see broader abilities for those who hold the license. And I think we're going to see, and what we've been saying is, there are enough licenses in the state of Pennsylvania. They're in the wrong counties right now. I love my friends in Cambria County, but their population is markedly less than it was before, and they can't give you a license, and a license can't travel outside of its county that it's in right now. So I think what we are going to see are more discussions of kind of a redistribution. So in areas where there aren't enough licenses, redistributing them to make sure that those that need it can get them. Because as Sidney and Terri and Edie all know, grocery stores are in the game now, and they're buying the same license that your corner restaurant wants to buy. So we really need to kind of look at where it is and figure out how we redistribute. I think you're going to have, there are discussions of creating a new license, and we're seeing some, in terms of Market Square, we saw a move in the Poconos. There's this giant $2 billion investment they're doing, this whole facility, and they found a way to bundle licenses to go there or use licenses, but they're not transferable. So that's the item that you have to think about as well, is do you want a license that you have the value and you can sell, or do you just want the license to sell, you know, alcohol while you're there, or maybe wine only while you're there, but then you don't have the value that's tied to it. And that's really a tricky question that restaurateurs have a really hard time figuring out, because those, once they get the license, they don't want the young restaurateur to get the same type of license at a piece of the cost that they paid. So I think we're going to see redistribution. I think we're going to see expansion. I don't know if we're going to see a brand new license in the near future.
Well, we're what, Sidney, Melissa, 30 seats, correct? For a restaurant liquor license?
30 seats, and you have to sell food. Yep.
30 rule.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So our next part, anyway, if we didn't get to your question, I will send it to Edie, Melissa, Terri, and Sidney, and they will answer it for you. Sorry, we didn't have enough time to get to everybody's question. But the next part of the program is we wanted to hear from somebody from 412 Food Rescue, since that's part of our whole program today, was to support them in some way with donations to their community takeout program. So I just wanted to introduce David Nemanis from 412 Food Rescue, and he will be giving you an overview of the program. David?
Hey there, thanks for having me. Appreciate you all taking the time to connect today. So I'm David Nemanis, the Partner Experience Manager at 412 Food Rescue. For those who aren't overly familiar, 412 Food Rescue was founded as a direct response to the fact that 40% of food that gets produced goes to waste, while approximately 1 in 7 Americans are experiencing food insecurity, which looks more like 1 in 5 right now based on the pandemic. So what we do is we find ways to get food that is perfectly edible that would go wasted and get it out of the waste stream and to people who need it. So working with grocery stores, restaurants, food distributors, catering companies, that type of a thing, they contact us when they have excess food that is still perfectly edible, but can't be served either because they're closing, expiration dates, many factors at play in this situation. So they contact us. We work with over 900 nonprofits in the Western Pennsylvania area, and then we direct this food directly to those nonprofits without banking it or warehousing it. And the way that we're able to accomplish this is by our large network of volunteers that are coordinated and mobilized through our mobile app. It's the Food Rescue Hero app. It is very similar to DoorDash or Uber in that it allows volunteers to see a map of the city, claim a rescue, and do the transportation in a kind of autonomy supportive way. As you can imagine, restaurants are an integral part of our operation. They don't necessarily donate a ton of food. If they did donate a ton of food, they'd go out of business. But there are things that slip through the cracks, 2 cases of tomatoes left over on a Sunday and the restaurant's closed on Monday and Tuesday. And they know they're not going to be to their customer standards by Wednesday. So there are certain situations, ordering errors. But when the pandemic struck, we were kind of in this difficult situation where we wanted to find a way to support our restaurant partners. Obviously, this has been a tremendously difficult past year for restaurants, and we wanted to find a way to help out. So we saw some organizations like Frontline Foods, Off Their Plate, organizations that were buying meals directly from restaurants and distributing those to frontline workers, which was really awesome and really valuable, especially early on in the pandemic. And we wanted to find a way to do something similar, but to serve our populations, which is food insecure people, and primarily housing sites. So we ran a 10-week program over the summer called Community Takeout. And the way it worked is kind of exactly as I was saying before. We would raise money, buy meals directly from these restaurants. And we started off with 8 restaurants over the summer. And we had a 10-week program going on where we would buy about 300 meals from each restaurant a week. And then we would have those delivered to housing sites. And it was really successful. It was kind of seen as a Band-Aid, a way to get some restaurants to the proverbial finish line. At that point in time, we still had no idea how long this thing might be lingering on for. And it was a nice way to, you know, prolong the inevitable of having to lay some employees off and that type of a thing. The program sunset once we kind of used all our funding, and we were able to do, you know, ad hoc iterations along the way where a donor might approach us and say, hey, we are going to raise $20,000. We want to support these 2 restaurants. Can you coordinate that for us? So we did some of those. And then it really blossomed towards the end of 2020 when Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership wanted to find a way to support their downtown restaurants and get them to that finish line, and liked the model that we put together and connected with 412 Food Rescue. And we found a way to support 19 restaurants that we're currently working with in the downtown area. And currently we are producing 3,000 meals a week and distributing those in the downtown Pittsburgh area and some of the surrounding neighborhoods. So it's kind of a Band-Aid that's being put on things right now, but it's really kind of addressing 2 issues, that of not as much revenue getting into restaurants and also food insecurity increasing at a pretty dramatic rate right now. So that's essentially the gist of the program. Any questions on any of that?
I don't see any questions, David, but we really appreciate you coming and talking about the program. And, you know, we're really excited to support you all for the impact that you're making. It's fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Absolutely. Okay.